Arab millionaire got two homeless twin girls pregnant. Everyone was shocked. But 6 years later, no one believed what they ended up doing. Alexander Pierce III stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, watching the Manhattan skyline shimmer in the late autumn sunset. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Pierce Global Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company with roots dating back to the Gilded Age. The Pierce name carried weight in every major boardroom from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, but tonight, that legacy felt more like a burden than a blessing. He loosened his perfectly knotted tie, a gesture that would have earned a disapproving glance from his grandfather, the family patriarch who had drilled into him the importance of maintaining appearances at all times. "A Pierce never shows weakness," the old man used to say. But alone in his office, 40 stories above the city streets, Alex allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. The quarterly board meeting had gone exactly as expected. Another record-breaking period, another series of successful acquisitions, another round of congratulations from people who smiled to his face while whispering behind his back. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. His phone buzzed with a message from Caroline Astor Whitney, his supposed perfect match, according to the social circles they both inhabited. Their families had been not so subtly pushing them together for months, seeing the potential for a merger. Of old money dynasties, Caroline was beautiful, intelligent, and as much a prisoner of her family name as he was of his. But the thought of another carefully orchestrated dinner date made him feel like he was suffocating in his tailored Tom Ford suit. "Mr. Pierce," his assistant's voice came through the intercom, "the car is waiting to take you to the charity gala." The Metropolitan Museum's annual Winter Gala, another night of performative philanthropy where the elite would congratulate themselves on their generosity while spending more on their outfits than they donated. Alex had been attending these events since he was old enough to wear a tuxedo, playing his part in the grand theater of high society. "Cancel it," he said, surprising himself as much as his assistant. "Cancel everything for the rest of the evening." "Sir, the board members are expecting you to tell them I'm feeling under the weather, something diplomatic." After his assistant's stammered acknowledgement, Alex stood in the silence of his office. For the first time in years, he had no scheduled appointments, no obligations, no expectations. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. He shed his suit jacket and grabbed a casual coat from the private closet he kept for emergencies. Within minutes, he was in the elevator, heading down to the street level instead of the private parking garage where his driver waited. The security guard at the lobby desk did a double take as Alex walked past, looking more like a regular New Yorker than the CEO whose portrait hung in the building's entrance. The November air hit him like a wake-up call as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Around him, the city pulsed with real life, not the sanitized version he experienced from behind tinted windows. Street vendors sold hot dogs and pretzels. Tourists clutched their maps, and locals hurried past with practiced indifference to it all. Alex walked without direction, letting his feet carry him away from the gleaming skyscrapers of Midtown. The further he went, the more the city changed. The designer boutiques gave way to small bodegas. The luxury cars were replaced by delivery vans, and the carefully maintained facades showed signs of wear and real life. In the gathering dusk, he found himself in a part of the city he'd never seen before despite living here his entire life. The streets were narrower, the buildings shorter and older. The smell of various cuisines, Thai, Dominican, Ethiopian, mingled in the air. This was the New York that tourists never saw, that his social circle pretended didn't exist. A commotion near a small community center caught his attention. Two women were arguing with a building manager who was locking up for the night. Even from a distance, Alex could see the desperation in their body language. "Please," one of them was saying, her voice carrying on the evening air. "The heating in our apartment isn't working, and they won't fix it until Monday. We just need somewhere warm for a few hours." The building manager shook his head. "I'm sorry, but we're closed. Policy is policy." As the manager walked away, the women huddled closer together. One was visibly pregnant, wearing a coat that seemed too thin for the November chill. The other supported her friend, but Alex noticed she too had a slight bump beneath her jacket. Something about the scene struck a chord deep within him. These women weren't looking for a handout or trying to scam anyone. They were simply trying to survive in a city that could be brutally indifferent to those without means. He had spent his entire life being taught to ignore scenes like this, to view them as unfortunate but necessary aspects of the natural order. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't Alexander Pierce III, heir to a corporate empire. He was just a man watching two fellow human beings in need of help. Before he could second-guess himself, he approached them. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice gentle to avoid startling them. "I couldn't help overhearing. There's a 24-hour diner around the corner. Maybe we could all get some coffee and warm up." The women exchanged wary glances, their suspicion obvious and completely justified. In a city like New York, random acts of kindness often came with hidden costs. "I'm Alex," he said, deliberately leaving off his last name. "No pressure, but it's getting colder, and I know the owner of the place. They make great hot chocolate." The pregnant woman shivered slightly, and her friend made a decision. "I'm Maya," she said cautiously. "This is Sarah. You're right about it getting colder." As they walked to the diner, Alex felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The simple human connection of helping someone without any agenda, without thinking about how it would look in the press or what the board would think. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt real. The fluorescent lights of Joey's all-night diner cast a warm glow over the worn leather booths. At this hour, the place was nearly empty, except for a few night shift workers and insomniacs nursing cups of coffee. The waitress, an older woman named Dot, who'd probably seen every type of New York story unfold in her diner, didn't bat an eye at the unusual trio as she led them to a corner booth. Maya and Sarah slid into one side, while Alex took the other, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched on their faces, but there was also a quiet dignity in how they carried themselves. These weren't people looking for pity. They were survivors doing their best in difficult circumstances. "Order whatever you'd like," Alex said, handing them menus. "The French toast here is amazing, even at midnight." Sarah, the quieter of the two, studied him with intelligent eyes. "Why are you helping us?" It was a fair question, one that Alex would have asked in their position. In New York, random acts of kindness were often viewed with suspicion, and a well-dressed man offering help to two pregnant women could certainly raise red flags. "Honestly," he wrapped his hands around a mug of coffee, "I needed to do something real tonight, something that wasn't about image or expectations or family legacy." He paused, surprised by his own candor. "I guess I needed this as much as you did." Maya's expression softened slightly. "You sound like you're running from something." "Maybe I am," Alex smiled wryly. "But right now, I'm just a guy having coffee with two people who look like they could use a warm place to sit." Dot returned to take their orders. Sarah hesitated over the menu until Alex insisted they order proper meals. Soon the table was laden with plates of French toast, eggs, hash browns, and side orders of fresh fruit. The abundance of food seemed to break down the last barriers of suspicion. As they ate, their stories emerged naturally. Maya was a talented software developer who'd lost her job when her startup folded. Sarah was a former teacher who'd left an impossible situation back home in Minnesota. They'd met at a women's shelter and formed a friendship based on mutual support and understanding. Both were determined to keep their babies despite the mounting obstacles. "The apartment building's a mess," Maya explained, cutting into her French toast. "The heating's always breaking down, but the landlord knows we can't afford to move right now. Tonight was just..." She shrugged, letting the gesture complete her sentence. Alex listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't done in years. In his world, problems were solved with money and influence, but he sensed that throwing cash at the situation would be insulting to these women's dignity. They didn't need a savior. They needed allies. "I might know someone who could help with the heating," he said carefully. "A friend who works in building maintenance. No strings attached. Just a professional doing their job." Sarah's protective instincts flared. "We're not looking for charity." "It's not charity," Alex assured her. "It's community. That's how neighborhoods are supposed to work, right? People helping people." The words felt strange in his mouth. This wasn't how the Pierces viewed the world. His family saw everything through the lens of power dynamics and advantage. But sitting here in this diner, Alex felt more authentic than he had in all the board meetings and charity galas combined. As the night wore on, their conversation deepened. Maya spoke about her dreams of starting her own tech company focused on accessibility software. Sarah shared her passion for educational reform and her plans to eventually open a community learning center. Their ambitions weren't so different from the deals he made in boardrooms. They just lacked the advantages he'd been born into. Around 2 a.m., Dot brought them fresh coffee without being asked. The diner had become a sanctuary, a neutral ground where social barriers didn't exist. Alex found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, his doubts about running the family business, the suffocating expectations, the loneliness of living in a world where every relationship was a potential business transaction. "Sounds like a gilded cage," Maya observed, her technical mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "All that power, but no freedom to be yourself." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most expensive prisons are the ones we build ourselves." Their words hit home harder than any of the expensive therapy sessions his family had insisted on over the years. Here were two women facing real hardship, yet they seemed more free than he'd ever been. As the night drew to a close, Alex insisted on calling them a car service. Not one of his usual luxury vehicles, but a reliable local company he found on his phone. Before they left, he wrote down his personal number, not his business contact. "If the heating isn't fixed by tomorrow, call me. No pressure, no expectations. Sometimes people just need to help other people, right?" Maya took the number, tucking it carefully into her coat. "Thank you, Alex, for the food, the company, and for being real with us." As he watched their car drive away, Alex felt something shift inside him. The city felt different now, more alive with possibility. He'd spent his whole life viewing New York through the tinted windows of luxury cars, never really seeing the vibrant communities and real human connections that existed beyond his privileged bubble. Walking back toward his part of town, Alex made a decision. He wouldn't be returning to his penthouse tonight. Instead, he found himself heading toward his mother's old brownstone, a place he hadn't visited since she left the family years ago, choosing freedom over fortune. Maybe it was time to understand why she made that choice. The brownstone stood exactly as Alex remembered it, a defiant holdout among the increasingly gentrified street. His mother, Eleanor Pierce, had refused to sell it even after leaving the family, calling it her piece of real New York. The key was still hidden behind the loose brick in the garden wall. Some habits never changed. Inside, the house was silent, but not empty. Eleanor had maintained it through a small trust she'd established before her departure, keeping it as a sort of time capsule of their former life. Family photos lined the walls. Eleanor and Alex at Central Park, his first day of school, moments captured before the weight of the Pierce legacy had fully settled on his shoulders. Alex ran his fingers along the dusty piano keys, remembering Sunday afternoons when his mother would play Chopin while his father was away on business. Those peaceful moments had grown increasingly rare as he got older, as the demands of being the Pierce heir began to consume his life. He made his way to his old bedroom, now preserved like a museum exhibit. Trophies from debate competitions lined the shelves, competitions he'd been required to win. Academic awards, newspaper clippings of his early business successes, all carefully curated to tell the story of a perfect heir. But there, hidden, in his old desk drawer, he found something that made his heart stop. A photograph he'd never seen before, showing Eleanor at what looked like a community center, surrounded by women and children. She was smiling, not the practiced society smile he knew from formal events, but a genuine expression of joy. The back of the photo was dated just months before she left the family. Scribbled beneath the date were the words, "The New Beginnings, Project where real change happens." His phone buzzed, startling him. A text from Caroline. "Heard you were ill. Hope you're not avoiding me. The families are expecting an announcement soon." Alex stared at the message, feeling the walls of expectation closing in again. The merger of the Pierce and Astor Whitney families through marriage would create an unprecedented concentration of power and wealth. It was what everyone expected. Everyone except his heart. Another message came through, this one from an unknown number. "It's Maya, Sarah's fever is getting worse. The building's still freezing, I know it's late, but..." Without hesitation, Alex called his most trusted maintenance contact, Roger, who'd been with the company for decades and owed him a few favors. Within minutes, he had Roger heading to their building with emergency heating equipment. But something about the situation nagged at him. He pulled up his laptop, using his corporate access to research the building's ownership. What he found made his blood run cold. The property was owned by a shell company, which was owned by another shell company, which ultimately traced back to Pierce Global Enterprises' real estate division. His own company was the negligent landlord. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been attending board meetings in heated skyscrapers, his company's cost-cutting measures had been making life miserable for tenants like Maya and Sarah. How many other buildings? How many other lives? His phone buzzed again, his grandfather this time. The old man never called this late unless something was wrong. With a sense of foreboding, Alex answered. "The board is concerned." His grandfather's voice was cold, precise. "You're being reckless, Alexander. First the gala, now these. Associations with tenants, it's beneath your position." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "How do you know about..." "We've always kept tabs on the family, boy. Your mother taught us the importance of anticipating complications." The casual mention of his mother sparked something in Alex. "What really happened when she left, grandfather?" A long pause followed. "She made her choice, as you'll have to make yours. The Astor-Whitney merger is vital to our future. Caroline is waiting. The announcement is scheduled for next week's charity ball. Don't disappoint the family, Alexander. Not like she did." The line went dead, leaving Alex alone in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by the carefully constructed narrative of his life. But now, for the first time, he was beginning to see the cracks in the foundation. His phone lit up with a text from Roger. "At the building now, found something weird in the maintenance records. You need to see this." Alex looked at the old photograph of his mother again, at the community center where she'd found whatever had given her the strength to walk away from everything. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see. He texted Maya back, "On my way." Then, almost as an afterthought, he grabbed the photograph of his mother and slipped it into his pocket. Something told him he would need every clue he could get to unravel the truth behind his mother's departure and his own future. The building's lobby was dim, illuminated only by flickering fluorescent lights that cast strange shadows on the worn linoleum floor. Roger, a barrel-chested man with graying hair and hands permanently stained with machine oil, was waiting by the maintenance room door. His expression was grave. "You're not going to like this, Mr. Pierce," he said, leading Alex inside. "Been doing this job 30 years, never seen anything like it." The maintenance room was a maze of pipes and electrical panels, but Roger went straight to a filing cabinet in the corner. From it, he pulled a stack of maintenance requests, all marked denied in red stamp. "These go back months," Roger explained, spreading them out. "Heating, plumbing, basic repairs, all denied. But here's the thing, the work orders were logged in our system as completed. Someone's been falsifying records." Alex scanned the documents, his corporate training kicking in. "These authorizations, they're using old codes from before we digitized the system. Whoever's doing this knows our old protocols." A noise from the hallway made them both turn. Maya stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Sarah's resting," she said. The space heater helped, but she trailed off, noticing the scattered papers. Her eyes narrowed with recognition. "Those are our maintenance requests." Alex felt the weight of his family name pressing down on him. "Maya, there's something I need to tell you." "You're Alexander Pierce," she cut him off. "I figured it out after you left the diner. Wasn't hard to find photos of the youngest CEO in Pierce Global's history." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex waited for the accusation, the anger, but Maya's reaction surprised him. "You could have had any contractor here in minutes," she said quietly. "Could have thrown money at the problem, but instead you came yourself twice. Why?" Before Alex could answer, his phone lit up with another message. This time, it was from Caroline's father, Richard Astor Whitney himself. "Special board meeting tomorrow morning," your grandfather insisted. "Don't be late." "Mr. Pierce," Roger interrupted, holding up another document. "You need to see this. It's from 15 years ago, signed by your mother." The paper was yellowed with age, but Eleanor's elegant signature was unmistakable. It was a proposal for something called the Community Housing Initiative, a program to convert Pierce Global's lower-income properties into affordable housing with guaranteed maintenance and support services. "This never happened," Alex said, scanning the document. "I would have known about it." "Actually," Maya stepped forward, "it did, just not the way it was supposed to." She pulled out her phone, showing him a blog post from years ago. "I did some research after figuring out who you were. The initiative was announced with great fanfare, but then quietly disappeared. The same week your mother left the family." Alex's head spun as connections began forming. The falsified maintenance records using old codes, the shell companies, his mother's photograph at the community center. It wasn't just corporate negligence, it was systematic. Someone deliberately tanked the initiative, he realized aloud. They wanted these buildings to fall into disrepair. But why? "Property values," Maya answered, her tech background showing. "Let the buildings deteriorate, force people out, then demolish and rebuild luxury condos. It's happening all over the city." Roger nodded grimly. "Been seeing it for years, never had proof though." A text from Maya's phone interrupted them. "Sarah's fever's worse, need help." They rushed upstairs to find Sarah curled up on a bare mattress, shivering despite the space heater. The room was small, with water stains on the ceiling and walls that had clearly seen better days. But what caught Alex's attention was a familiar logo barely visible on Sarah's partially unzipped backpack. The New Beginnings Project. "Sarah," he said carefully, "did you ever work at a community center?" She opened her eyes, focusing on him with effort. "Before Minnesota. Was a teacher there." Her voice was weak but clear. "Best job I ever had until the funding got cut. There was this amazing woman who ran it. Eleanor, I think her name was." The revelation hit Alex like a thunderbolt. Sarah had known his mother, had worked with her. The connections weren't random at all. They were pieces of a puzzle he was only now beginning to see. His phone buzzed again, a reminder about tomorrow's board meeting. In less than 12 hours, he was supposed to face the board, announce his engagement to Caroline, and cement his place in the Pierce dynasty. But now he knew there was so much more at stake. "Maya," he said, making a decision, "I need your help, both of you. I think I know why my mother left, but proving it means taking on some of the most powerful people in New York." Maya looked at Sarah, then back at Alex. "Well," she said with a hint of her old determination, "good thing I know how to hack corporate databases. Just never had the right access codes before." Roger cleared his throat. "Been keeping records of my own for years. Never knew who to trust with them until now." As the night deepened, they began to plan. Tomorrow's board meeting wouldn't go the way his grandfather expected. But first, they needed to get Sarah somewhere safe. And Alex knew exactly where to take her. The same place his mother had once helped others escape the crushing weight of poverty and power, the New Beginnings Project building. If it still existed, it might hold the key to everything. The New Beginnings Project building stood in stark contrast to Alex's memories from the photograph. The once vibrant community center was now a shadow of its former self, with boards covering some windows and a for sale sign hanging crookedly on the fence. But a dim light still burned inside, suggesting that someone was keeping the place alive. Sarah had stabilized after they'd moved her to Alex's mother's brownstone, with Maya staying to watch over her. Now, in the pre-dawn hours, Alex stood before the community center with Roger beside him, both men aware that they were crossing a point of no return. "Your mother used to come here 3 times a week," Roger said quietly. "Always thought it was strange. A Pierce spending time in this neighborhood. Now it makes sense." Before Alex could respond, the front door opened. A woman in her 60s emerged, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. She took one look at Alex, and froze. "My God," she whispered. "You look just like her. You knew my mother?" The woman, who introduced herself as Gloria Martinez, the center's director, ushered them inside. The interior was worn but clean, with children's artwork decorating the walls and motivational posters promising better tomorrows. "Eleanor was our guardian angel," Gloria explained, leading them to her office. "She didn't just donate money. She got involved, really involved. Started the housing initiative, set up education programs, job training. She believed in giving people real chances, not just handouts." Gloria's office was a testament to decades of community service. Among the photographs on her wall, Alex spotted several of his mother, Eleanor looking happy, engaged, alive in a way he'd rarely seen her at home. "What happened?" Alex asked, though he was beginning to piece it together. "Why did it all stop?" Gloria's expression darkened. "Your grandfather happened. He found out what she was doing, not just here but at centers across the city. She was building a network documenting everything wrong with how Pierce Global handled its properties, the maintenance scams, the forced evictions, everything. She was building a case," Alex realized. "That's what was in those files she took when she left." "Eleanor knew too much," Gloria nodded. "They gave her a choice: leave everything behind, including you, or watch as they dismantled every program, every initiative, every life she'd helped build. They made sure she knew they'd ruin not just her, but everyone she'd tried to help." Roger pulled out his phone, showing Gloria the maintenance records they'd discovered. "It's still happening. They're using the old system to hide it, but they're deliberately running these buildings into the ground." Gloria wasn't surprised. "We've been documenting everything. Eleanor taught us well. Keep records. Build evidence. We knew someday someone would need it." She fixed Alex with a penetrating stare. "We just didn't know it would be her son." A text message lit up Alex's phone. "Where are you? Board meeting in 3 hours. Grandfather insisting on private breakfast first. Caroline." Another message followed immediately. "Maya here. Found something in Sarah's old emails. You need to see this. It's about your mother." Alex looked at the time, 5:47 a.m. The board meeting was at 9 go, with breakfast at 7:30. A plan began forming in his mind. "Gloria, I need everything you have, all the documentation, all the evidence, and I need to know how to contact my mother." "I haven't spoken to Eleanor in years," Gloria admitted. "But..." She walked to a filing cabinet, unlocking it with a key she wore around her neck. "She left this. Said someday you might come looking for answers." The envelope she handed him was thick with documents, but what caught Alex's attention was a small key attached to a tag with an address he didn't recognize. "It's in Brooklyn," Gloria explained. "A storage unit. She said if anything happened to her, everything that mattered was in there." Alex's phone buzzed again. Maya sending documents she'd found. The pieces were falling into place faster now, forming a picture that both thrilled and terrified him. "Roger," he turned to the maintenance manager, "I need you to get every record." "You have to Gloria. She'll know what to do with them." "And where are you going?" Gloria asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. "I have a breakfast to attend," Alex said, carefully tucking his mother's envelope into his jacket, "and a story to tell." As they left the building, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. A new day was coming, and with her, the chance to right old wrongs. But first, Alex needed to make one more stop, the storage unit in Brooklyn. Whatever his mother had left there might be the key to everything. He checked his watch again. 2 hours until breakfast with his grandfather. Time enough to gather the final pieces of evidence he needed. But as he hailed a taxi, his phone lit up with an urgent message from Maya. "Sarah's awake. She remembers everything about Eleanor. And Alex, there's something about your birth certificate you need to know." The Brooklyn storage facility was tucked away in an industrial area, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. The taxi dropped Alex off just as the sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows between the rows of storage units. The key from Gloria felt heavy in his hand as he located Unit 247. His phone showed a stream of messages from Maya, each one more urgent than the last, but they would have to wait. Whatever was in this unit, his mother had thought it important, enough to preserve for years, The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo in the early morning quiet. The unit was smaller than he'd expected, but meticulously organized. Boxes lined the walls, each labeled with dates and locations. But it was the old desk in the center that drew his attention. His mother's desk from their home, the one that had disappeared the same day she did. Inside the desk's drawer, he found a letter addressed to him, dated the day she left. With trembling hands, he opened it. "My dearest Alex, if you're reading this, you've finally started asking the right questions. The truth is, you were never meant to be the Pierce heir, because you're not a Pierce at all. You came to me one night at the center, barely 6 months old, brought by a desperate young woman who couldn't care for you. Your father was a brilliant man from a humble background who had crossed paths with the Pierce family in a way that had to be buried. I was unable to have children of my own, and your grandfather saw an opportunity. He orchestrated everything. The paperwork, the cover story, even the false birth certificate. You became a Pierce, and the truth became another secret for the family to bury. I thought I could protect you by giving you everything I never had: position, power, privilege. But watching you grow into their mold, losing your true self to their expectations, I realized I was just another link in their chain of lies. The evidence in these boxes isn't just about corrupt building practices or exploitation of the poor. It's about decades of manipulation, of lives ruined to maintain the Pierce family's power. Your true parent's story is here too, along with proof of who you really are. The choice I couldn't make 15 years ago is now yours. Truth or power, reality or illusion, love or legacy. All my love, Mom." Alex sat heavily on an old chair, his world tilting on its axis. His phone buzzed again. Maya had sent him a scan of a document Sarah had kept all these years, his original birth certificate, listing parents he'd never known. Another message popped up. Grandfather's car spotted heading to breakfast venue. Early. He knows something's wrong. Caroline. Then another from Maya. Sarah's connection to Eleanor wasn't just the community center. She was there the night your mother took you in. She was just a teenager then, volunteering at the center. She never forgot that night. The pieces were falling into place with dizzying speed. Alex looked at the boxes surrounding him. Evidence of decades of corruption, proof of his true identity, the real story of his mother's exile. All of it, pointing to one inescapable truth. The Pierce legacy was built on lies. His watch showed 7:15 a.m. The breakfast with his grandfather was in 15 minutes. The board meeting, where he was supposed to announce his engagement to Caroline and cement his place in the Pierce dynasty, would follow. Everything he'd been groomed for his entire life waited for him in a luxury restaurant 15 blocks away. But first, he had a stop to make. The taxi ride back to his mother's brownstone felt like traveling between worlds. Sarah was awake when he arrived, sitting up in bed with Maya beside her. The resemblance to the photograph in his pocket, the one of his mother at the community center, struck him anew. "I remember that night," Sarah said without preamble. "Your mother was working late at the center. A young woman came in, desperate, carrying a baby. She was a brilliant mathematician who'd been involved with someone powerful, someone who was already married. They threatened to destroy her career, her future, everything. Your mother, she made a choice that night. She chose love over power," Alex said softly, understanding at last. His phone lit up one final time. "Caroline. Your grandfather is waiting. Whatever you're planning, please think about what you're risking. The merger, our family's future, everything we've worked for." Alex looked at the message, then at Sarah and Maya. Two women who had nothing yet, had shown him everything about real courage, about choosing truth over comfort, love over power. He thought of his mother, making the same choice 15 years ago. "Maya," he said, "how fast can you upload documents to the cloud?" She held up her laptop with a grin. "Already started. Everything Gloria gave us, everything from the storage unit, it's all being backed up to secure servers right now." "Good." Alex straightened his tie. "Because I have a breakfast to attend and a story to tell." As he headed for the door, Sarah called out, "Alex, your mother would be proud." He paused, looking back at the unlikely family he'd found, A tech genius, a teacher, and a truth that had waited 15 years to be told. "I know," he said, "and for the first time in my life, I'm proud too." The morning sun was fully up, now as Alex stepped outside, illuminating a city that looked entirely different from the one he'd known just days ago. In his pocket, he carried his mother's letter and the evidence that would shake the Pierce empire to its foundations. In his heart, he carried something even more powerful, the certainty of who he really was and who he wanted to be. The private dining room at the Pierre Hotel was a temple to old money, all gleaming silverware and hushed conversations. William Pierce III, Alex's grandfather, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit impeccably tailored, the very image of patriarchal power. Caroline was there too, looking elegant but worried in a Chanel suit. Her father, Richard Astor Whitney, stood by the window, phone in hand, probably already working on the day's deals. They all looked up as Alex entered, 15 minutes late and carrying a briefcase that hadn't been part of his usual accessories. "Glad you could join us." His grandfather's voice carried that familiar edge of steel beneath the courtesy. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd forgotten our little breakfast meeting." Alex took his seat, noting how they'd arranged themselves. His grandfather at the head, Caroline to his right, her father to his left. A power play disguised as a family gathering. How had he never noticed these things before? "I apologize for my tardiness," Alex said, setting his briefcase on the table. "I was picking up some interesting reading material." William Pierce's eyes narrowed slightly. "I trust you're feeling better after your indisposition last night." "Much better. Amazing what a night of clarity can do." Caroline touched his arm, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the morning light. "Alex, darling, perhaps we should discuss the announcement for the board meeting. Daddy's PR team has prepared a lovely statement about our engagement." "Actually," Alex opened his briefcase, "I have a different announcement in mind." The breakfast arrived. Eggs Benedict for his grandfather, smoked salmon for Caroline, fruit and granola for her father. Alex left his plate untouched as he pulled out the first document. "Do you recognize this, grandfather? It's the original proposal for the community housing initiative. Mother's signature is still clear after all these years." William Pierce's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his fork. Ancient history, failed programs and foolish idealism have no place in today's business world. "What about this?" Alex laid out more documents. Maintenance records showing systematic neglect of properties, shell companies designed to hide ownership, evidence of tenant harassment and illegal evictions, all bearing Pierce Global's fingerprints. Richard Astor Whitney stepped forward, his deal-maker's instincts engaging. "Now, Alex, every major real estate company has its complicated histories, nothing that can't be managed with the right approach. Like how you managed my mother, forced her into exile to protect her evidence, or how you managed my real parents." The room went deadly quiet. Caroline's fork clattered against her plate. "Alex," his grandfather's voice was low, dangerous, "think very carefully about what you're doing." "Oh, I have." Alex pulled out his phone, showing them the screen. "Maya, you're live." Maya's voice came through clearly. "Uploading the final files now. Everything's backed up on secure servers across 3 continents. Even Pierce Global's tech team can't bury this." William Pierce stood slowly, his calm facade cracking. "You have no idea what you're throwing away. The merger, your inheritance, your very name, all of it rests on your cooperation." "My name?" Alex laughed, and the sound held no humor. "We both know Pierce isn't my real name, just like we know what really happened to my biological father when he threatened to expose his relationship with a Pierce cousin, a brilliant mathematician whose career and reputation were destroyed to protect the family name." Caroline gasped softly. Her father moved to pull out his phone, but Alex raised a hand. "I wouldn't, Mr. Astor Whitney, unless you want your own family's connections to these practices made public. Those shell companies had multiple owners, after all." "What do you want?" His grandfather's voice was barely controlled fury. Alex stood, matching the old man's stance. A complete overhaul of Pierce Global's property management, full funding restored to the community housing initiative, independent auditors for all our real estate holdings, and a public acknowledgement of past wrongs, including what was done to my mother. You'll destroy decades of business relationships, Richard protested. The stock will plummet. Then we'll rebuild ethically this time. Alex turned to Caroline. I'm sorry, but there won't be an announcement today. You deserve better than a marriage built on lies. She studied him for a long moment, then slowly removed her engagement ring. I knew something was different about you these past few days. You seemed real for the first time since we met. William Pierce made one last attempt. If you do this, you'll never be welcome in this family again. Grandfather, Alex smiled sadly. I never really was. He picked up his briefcase and headed for the door, then paused. The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. I suggest you use that time to consider your options. The truth comes out today one way or another. As he walked out of the Pierre, his phone buzzed with a message from Maya. Sarah's feeling better. Gloria's here too. We're all watching the live stream of the board meeting. Give them hell. Another message followed, this one from an unknown. Umber, my son, I've waited 15 years for this day. I'm on my way, Mum. Alex straightened his tie and hailed a taxi. The Pierce Global headquarters awaited, and with it, the chance to reshape a legacy built on lies into something true. The board meeting would be starting soon, and he had a story to tell, not just his story, but the stories of everyone the Pierce empire had tried to silence. The taxi driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Where to, boss? Alex looked at his reflection, seeing for the first time not the heir to a fortune, but simply a man choosing truth over power. Pierce Global headquarters. Time to go home. The Pierce Global boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. As Alex entered, the morning sun streamed in, illuminating the faces of the board members, old friends of his grandfather, industry titans and carefully chosen allies who had helped build the Pierce empire. They all turned to watch him walk in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. News of the breakfast confrontation had obviously spread. His grandfather and the Astor Whitneys were conspicuously absent. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex began, standing at the head of the table, I called this emergency meeting to discuss the future of Pierce Global Enterprises. But first, we need to be honest about our past. He connected his laptop to the presentation screen, and Maya's work appeared. Decades of financial records, property assessments, and internal communications laid bare. For years, we've built our real estate empire on systematic exploitation. We've forced people from their homes, destroyed communities, and buried the evidence beneath layers of shell companies and false documentation. Today, that ends. The boardroom erupted in protest. Veterans of corporate warfare reached for their phones only to find their signals blocked, another gift from Maya's technical expertise. Mr. Pierce, Elizabeth Chen, one of the younger board members, spoke up. These are serious allegations. If even half of this is true, it's all true, a new voice said from the doorway. Eleanor Pierce stood there, elegant as ever in a simple blue suit, her hair more silver than Alex remembered, but her spine still straight and proud. I should know I helped build the system before I understood what it really meant. The room fell silent as Eleanor walked to stand beside her son. Alex felt her hand slip into his, offering silent support. 15 years ago, she continued, I discovered the truth about our business practices, about how we were destroying lives in the name of profit, about the talented young mathematician whose life we ruined to protect the family name, Alex's real father. Murmurs spread through the room as Eleanor laid out her own documents, the original evidence she'd gathered, including the proof of Alex's true parentage. I made a choice then, she said, to leave rather than fight. It was the wrong choice. My son is braver than I was. Alex squeezed his mother's hand, then addressed the board again. We're not here to destroy Pierce Global. We're here to transform it. I've prepared a comprehensive plan for ethical property management, community investment, and corporate transparency. He outlined the proposals: restoration of the Community Housing Initiative, independent auditors, a new board of community, representatives to oversee property management decisions. With each point, He could see the mood in the room shifting. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Live feeds showing major news outlets picking up the story. Social media's exploding. Seinker Pierce Global Truth is trending. Another message followed from Gloria. Community centers across the city are mobilizing. People are sharing their stories. You've started something big. The boardroom doors opened again. William Pierce entered, looking every one of his 75 years. But instead of taking his usual place at the head of the table, he walked to where Alex and Eleanor stood. "You want to change everything we've built," he said, his voice heavy. "Throw away generations of work." "No, grandfather," Alex replied. "I want to build something better, something real." William Pierce looked at his daughter, then at the grandson, who wasn't really his grandson. "The truth about your father, about your birth, it was meant to protect the family. It was meant to protect your power," Eleanor corrected gently. "There's a difference." The old man was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city he'd helped shape. Finally, he turned back to Alex. "You'll need a strong board to implement these changes. People who understand both business and ethics." He paused. "I'd like to nominate Gloria Martinez for a position." Alex blinked in surprise. His grandfather managed a small, tired smile. "I'm too old to change, but I'm not too old to recognize when change is necessary." The next hour was a blur of votes, resolutions, and historic decisions. By the time it was over, Pierce Global had a new direction and a new purpose. The press was gathering in the lobby, eager for statements about the company's transformation. Alex's phone lit up one last time. A message from Sarah. "Just heard from the hospital. Both babies are perfectly healthy. Maya's been explaining everything to them about their future aunt or uncle. Seems your mother has quite a story to tell about that mathematician she fell in love with all those years ago." He looked at Eleanor, who was deep in conversation with Elizabeth Chen about implementing the new community programs. She caught his eye and smiled, the same warm, real smile from the old photograph at the community center. "Ready to face the press?" she asked, joining him by the windows. Alex looked out at the city, not from above this time, but as part of it. Somewhere down there, Maya and Sarah were watching, along with countless others whose lives would be changed by today's decisions. "Actually," he said, "I thought we might take the side exit. There's a little diner I know, makes amazing French toast, and I think it's time you met some very important people." Eleanor looped her arm through his. "Lead the way, my son." As they left the boardroom, Alex felt lighter than he had in years. The Pierce legacy would continue, but transformed into something new, something built on truth, compassion, and real human connection. The power hadn't disappeared. It had simply found a better purpose. The morning sun painted the city gold. As mother and son stepped into the elevator together, heading down to street level, where real life happened and true stories began. Joey's all-night diner had never seen a gathering quite like this. Eleanor Pierce sat in the same booth where her son had first met Maya and Sarah, her elegant suit looking surprisingly at home against the worn leather seats. Across from her, Maya and Sarah listened intently as she filled in the missing pieces of a story 15 years in the making. "His name was David Chen," Eleanor said, running her finger around the rim of her coffee cup. "He was a brilliant mathematician, working on algorithmic theories that could revolutionize urban planning. We met at a conference where he was presenting his research on sustainable city development." Alex watched his mother's face soften with memories. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, catching the silver in her hair. "The Pierce family had already arranged my marriage to strengthen their business ties," she continued. "But David, he showed me a different way of seeing the world. His algorithms weren't just about efficiency. They were about making cities work for everyone, not just the wealthy. That's why you started the community housing initiative," Maya realized. "You were trying to implement his theories." Eleanor nodded. "We fell in love, but the family would never have accepted him. When I discovered I was pregnant, David wanted to go public, to challenge the arranged marriage. That's when everything fell apart." Sarah reached across the table, taking Eleanor's hand. "I remember the night you brought Alex to the center. I was just a teenage volunteer, but I'll never forget the look on your face, like you were breaking and healing all at once." The family threatened to destroy David's career, to bury his research so deep it would never see the light of day. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hand trembled slightly. I had to leave the country to protect his work. I made a deal with my father. I would give up David and raise Alex as a Pierce, and in return, they would leave David alone. Alex felt a new understanding of his mother's sacrifice wash over him. But you never stopped fighting, did you? The community centers, the housing initiative, it was all part of a bigger plan. I couldn't implement David's full vision, but I could lay the groundwork, Eleanor smiled. And now, with Pierce, Global's new direction, maybe his dream of ethical urban development can finally become reality. The diner's door chimed as Gloria entered, waving a tablet. "You're going to want to see this," she said, sliding into the booth next to Eleanor. "The story's everywhere. Pierce Global's stock took an initial hit, but it's already stabilizing. Seems like the market respects corporate responsibility more than we thought." Maya pulled out her laptop, showing them the flood of social media responses. People are sharing their stories about living in Pierce Global properties, both good and bad. The transparency is actually building trust. And look at this. Other real estate companies are suddenly announcing their own community initiative programs. You've started a trend. More importantly, Sarah added, the community centers are getting calls from people wanting to help. Volunteers, donors, professionals offering pro bono services. It's like people were just waiting for someone to take the first step. Alex's phone buzzed with a message from Caroline. "Just told Daddy I'm joining the new community oversight board. He nearly had a heart attack. Thank you for showing me there's more to life than mergers. Dinner sometime? As friends?" Another message followed, this one from his grandfather. "Elizabeth Chen showed me the preliminary plans for implementing David's algorithms. He was right. We were wrong. When you're ready, I'd like to meet him." Eleanor read the message over his shoulder, her eyes widening. "After all these years..." "Mom," Alex said gently. "Where is he?" "My father." "Singapore," she replied. "He's been teaching at a university there, still working on his theories. We've stayed in touch very carefully all these years. He knows everything that's happened." As if on cue, Alex's phone lit up with an international call. The number was unfamiliar, but something in his heart knew. The diner fell silent as he answered. "Hello? Alex?" The voice was warm, with just a trace of an accent. "This is David, your father. I've been watching the news. You've done something extraordinary." Alex felt tears prick at his eyes. "I had good examples to follow. Both of my parents fought for what they believed in their own ways." "I'm flying to New York," David said. "There's 15 years of research I'd like to share with Pierce Global's new leadership. If you're interested." "We're interested." Alex looked at his mother, seeing joy break across her face like sunrise. "We're very interested." After the call ended, Dot appeared with a fresh pot of coffee and a knowing smile. "Special occasions call for my famous apple pie," she announced, distributing slices to the expanded family gathered in her booth. As they ate, plans began taking shape. Maya's tech skills would be crucial in implementing David's algorithms. Sarah's teaching experience would help shape the educational programs at the community centers. Gloria's decades of community work would guide the company's new direction. And Eleanor would finally get to finish what she'd started 15 years ago. "You know," Alex said, looking around the table, "when I walked into this diner a few days ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I had the perfect life planned, the merger, the marriage, the manor in the Hamptons. And now?" Sarah asked, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Alex smiled, thinking of all the work ahead, the buildings to renovate, the communities to rebuild, the trust to restore. "Now I have something better, something real." Outside, the city was waking up to a new day and a new story. The Pierce name would still carry weight, but now it would stand for something different. Not power over people, but power to help people. Not legacy through control, but legacy through positive change. Eleanor squeezed her son's hand. "Ready to get to work?" Alex looked at his unlikely family. a tech genius, a teacher, a community leader, and the mother who had sacrificed everything to give him a chance to make his own choices. More than ready, we have a city to rebuild. 3 months had passed since the day Alex walked into Joey's diner and found his true north. The December snow fell softly outside the windows of the newly renovated New Beginnings project building, where a very different kind of board meeting was taking place. The conference room looked nothing like the austere chambers of Pierce Global. Children's artwork decorated the walls, and the large table was surrounded by a diverse group of faces, community leaders, business experts, and residents, all having an equal voice in the future of their neighborhoods. Maya, now head of Pierce Global's new Technical Innovation Division, was presenting the first results of implementing David Chen's algorithms. Her pregnancy was showing now, matching Sarah's own progress as they both entered their final trimesters. "The adaptive housing model is already showing results," Maya explained, her hands moving animatedly as she walked through the data. "By integrating community needs with sustainable development practices, we're seeing a 40% increase in resident satisfaction and a 60% decrease in maintenance issues." Eleanor, who co-chaired the board with Gloria, beamed with pride. The community housing initiative she'd dreamed up years ago was finally becoming reality, enhanced by her former love's brilliant mathematical framework and their son's determination to make it work. The educational programs are thriving too, Sarah added from her seat. She had taken charge of developing learning centers within each housing complex. "We're seeing parents and children learning together, building skills and community at the same time." Alex watched it all from his place, at the table, no longer at the head, but among equals. The past months had been challenging, restructuring Pierce Global, implementing new policies and dealing with the media attention that came with their story. But every challenge had been worth it. His grandfather, though retired from active management, had surprised everyone by becoming one of their strongest advocates. The old man had found a new purpose in mentoring young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, sharing his business acumen while learning about the real world beyond his former bubble of privilege. Caroline had thrown herself into community work with unexpected passion, using her social connections to build bridges between worlds that had been separated for too long. She and Alex had developed a genuine friendship, stronger than any arranged marriage could have been. The door opened and David Chen entered, having just flown in from Singapore, where he was wrapping up his university commitments. He would be moving to New York permanently in the new year, joining Pierce Global as Chief Innovation Officer, and more importantly, finally taking his place in his son's life. "Sorry I'm late," he smiled, taking a seat between Eleanor and Alex. "But I bring good news. The International Urban Development Conference wants to feature our integrated community model as a case study in ethical city planning." Alex watched his parents exchange a glance full of 15 years of unspoken love and shared purpose. Their relationship was slowly rebuilding, not as a fairy tale romance, but as a partnership of equals united by their dreams for a better world. His phone buzzed with a message from Roger. Final building inspection passed at the Riverside complex. "Families moving in next week. You're going to want to see this." The attached photo showed the transformed apartment building where he'd first met Maya and Sarah. The facade was restored, the heating worked perfectly, and the community spaces buzzed with life. But what caught his eye was the small plaque by the entrance, the Eleanor Pierce Community House, where every story matters. "I have something to share too," Maya said, pulling up a new slide. "We've been running analytics on the impact of our changes. It's not just about buildings anymore. We're seeing improvements in education rates, job placements, even public health metrics. The ripple effects are incredible." Gloria nodded in satisfaction. "That's because we're not just fixing buildings. We're rebuilding trust. When people feel secure in their homes, when they're part of a community that values them, everything else becomes possible." As the meeting continued, Alex found himself thinking about the word legacy. 3 months ago, it had meant something very different. To him, a burden of expectations and appearances, a cage of privilege and power. Now it meant something real, the smile of a child doing homework in a safe, warm apartment, the pride of a resident learning new job skills, the joy of communities coming together to shape their own futures. Sarah caught his eye from across their table and smiled knowingly. They had all found something they didn't know they were looking for, not just help or purpose, but family. A family built not on blood or name or power, but on shared values and genuine care for each other. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city in white. Soon the meeting would end, and they would all head to Joey's diner for their now traditional family dinner. Dot had already reserved their usual booth, where they would plan and dream and simply enjoy being together. Alex looked around the table at these people who had changed his life. Maya with her brilliant mind and fearless spirit, Sarah with her quiet strength and unwavering compassion, Gloria with her lifetime of dedication, his mother with her renewed purpose, his father with his visionary dreams, and all the others who had joined their cause. The Pierce name would still carry weight in New York, but now it stood for something different. Not the power to control, but the power to uplift. Not a legacy of privilege, but a legacy of positive change. Outside the window, the city stretched into the snowy distance. Not a battlefield of competition and control anymore, but a community of interconnected lives and stories, each one valuable, each one worth fighting for. And in that moment, Alex knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Spring had come to New York, bringing with it new beginnings in more ways than one. The community garden on the rooftop of the Eleanor Pierce Community House was in full bloom, tended by residents who had transformed the once empty space into a thriving oasis of vegetables and flowers. Maya sat in her favorite spot among the garden beds, her laptop balanced on a small table, as she made final adjustments to the presentation she would give at next week's Global Urban Development Summit. At 8 months pregnant, she had refused to slow down, insisting that the best ideas came to her while surrounded by growing things. "The algorithms are beautiful," David said, looking over her shoulder at the complex patterns on her screen. "But what makes them work is the human element you've added. They adapt to how people actually live, not just how we think they should live." After his permanent move to New York, David had thrown himself into working with Maya to refine and expand his original theories. The mathematician who had once been forced to hide his work was now receiving international recognition for innovations in ethical urban development. "Alex is going to love this part," Maya grinned, pulling up a new visualization. "Remember that first building where he found Sarah and me? Look at the community impact data from the past 6 months." The door to the rooftop opened, and Sarah waddled out, also in the final stages of her pregnancy. She had just finished teaching a literacy class in the building's learning center, where parents and children studied together in an environment designed to support whole families. "The kids wrote stories today," she announced, easing herself into a chair. "About their dream neighborhoods. You should see what they imagine. Libraries that are also playgrounds, gardens that float in the sky, buildings that change colors with the seasons. They're not just thinking about houses anymore, they're thinking about communities." The sound of more footsteps announced the arrival of Eleanor and Gloria, deep in discussion about the next phase of the community housing initiative. The program had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, with other cities reaching out to implement similar models. "William wants to establish a foundation," Eleanor was saying, referring to Alex's grandfather. The old man had surprised everyone with his transformation, becoming one of their strongest advocates for ethical business practices. "He's talking about creating a permanent funding source for community development projects." "Speaking of development," Gloria smiled, "has Alex told you about Caroline's latest project?" The former socialite had discovered a passion for urban agriculture, using her connections to create a network of rooftop gardens across the city. The vegetables and herbs they grew supplied local food banks and restaurants, creating jobs and fresh food sources in former food deserts. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Alex. "On my way with big news, don't let anyone leave." "He's been mysterious all week," Sarah observed. "Every time I ask what he's planning, he just grins and changes the subject." The rooftop door opened again and Alex emerged, looking both excited and slightly nervous. He was carrying a large roll of blueprints under one arm and a familiar cardboard box from Joey's diner in the other. "Before I show you these," he said, setting down the blueprints, "we need pie. It's tradition. As Dot's famous apple pie was distributed, Alex unrolled the blueprints across one of the garden tables. Everyone gathered around, curious to see what had him so energized. "Remember how we talked about expanding the community center concept?" he began. "Well, I think I found the perfect location, or rather, locations." The blueprints showed a series of connected buildings occupying a full city block. The complex included affordable housing units, educational spaces, healthcare facilities, and business incubators, all designed around central green spaces and community gathering areas. "It's the old Astor Whitney development project," Caroline's voice came from the doorway as she joined them. "Daddy's wedding gift to me before everything changed. I convinced the family to donate the land. And look at this." Alex pointed to a section of the plans. "The main building will house the David Chen Institute for Urban Innovation, where Maya will run her tech development program. The education wing will be the Sarah Mitchell Learning Center, with space for everything from early childhood programs to adult education." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she saw her name on the blueprints. "Alex, you shouldn't have—" "That's not all," he continued. "The whole complex will be called the New Beginning Center, carrying on Gloria and Mom's legacy. And guess where it's located?" Eleanor studied the plans, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's the block where the original community center was, where everything started." "Where everything started," Alex agreed softly, "and where it continues. The construction begins next month, and the first phase will be ready just in time for 2 very special new residents." He smiled at Maya and Sarah's pregnant bellies. As the sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across the rooftop garden, the extended family shared pie and dreams. The blueprints fluttered gently in the spring breeze, showing a future that none of them could have imagined just months ago. Maya's laptop screen still glowed with her presentation graphs, but the numbers and algorithms seemed less important now compared to the real human connections they represented. Sarah's student stories about dream neighborhoods didn't seem so fantastical anymore. They were becoming reality, one community at a time. Alex's phone lit up with one final message of the day from his grandfather. "Your grandmother would have been proud. She always said the true measure of wealth was in the lives you touched, not the money you made. I'm just sorry it took me so long to understand that." As twilight settled over the garden, the first stars appearing above the city skyline, Alex looked at his gathered family, not just blood relations, but the family he had chosen and who had chosen him. Together, they had transformed not just buildings or businesses, but the very meaning of legacy. The grand opening of the New Beginning Center coincided with the first cool days of September. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Both. Maya and Sarah had welcomed their babies just weeks before, adding 2 tiny new members to their ever-growing family. The center stood as a testament to what was possible when people dared to reimagine what community could mean. The modern buildings wrapped around courtyards filled with gardens and play areas. The David Chen Institute occupied the East Wing, its innovative design reflecting the groundbreaking work happening inside. The Sarah Mitchell Learning Center buzzed with activity, its classrooms and workshops already filled with eager learners of all ages. Alex stood in the main atrium, watching people flow through the space as if they'd always belonged there. Maya sat nearby, her newborn daughter nestled in a sling as she demonstrated the center's integrated technology systems to a group of visiting urban planners. The baby, named Eleanor Rose, after 2 strong women who had shaped her world, slept peacefully, despite the excitement around her. Sarah was leading a tour through the learning center, her son David cradled in one arm while she explained the philosophy behind their educational programs. The baby boy, named for the mathematician who had dared to dream of better cities, watched, everything with curious eyes that already seemed to hold his namesake's intelligence. "It's quite something, isn't it?" Eleanor's voice came from beside Alex. She and David had just returned from showing the computational center to a delegation from Singapore. "Seeing all the pieces finally come together. It's more than I ever imagined," Alex admitted. "When I walked into that diner that night, I thought I was just helping 2 people. I had no idea I was finding my way home." Gloria joined them, accompanied by William Pierce. The former corporate titan now spent his days mentoring young entrepreneurs from the center's business incubator program, finding more satisfaction in building people up than in accumulating power. The waiting list for housing units is growing, Gloria reported. But more importantly, other developers are starting to copy our model. The ripple effect is spreading across the city. Across the country, actually, Caroline added, approaching, with a tablet displaying news headlines. 3 more cities have approved similar projects. They're calling it the Pierce model of ethical urban development. Alex smiled at the irony. The Pierce name still carried weight, but now it stood for something his grandmother would have been proud of, something real. The sound of a piano drew their attention. In the community hall, a young girl was playing on the grand piano that had been donated by the Astor Whitney family. The same piece of music Eleanor used to play on Sunday afternoons, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, filled the air. Maya joined them, little Eleanor Rose still sleeping soundly. "Remember that first night in the diner?" she asked softly. "When you said you needed to do something real?" "Best decision I ever made," Alex replied, watching as Sarah approached, with baby David, completing their circle. The afternoon sun streamed through the atrium's skylights, casting warm patterns across the gathered family. They had all changed so much since that cold November night that had brought them together. Maya's technological brilliance had found its perfect application in serving communities. Sarah's dedication to education had blossomed into a program that was changing lives. Gloria's lifetime of community service had become a model for others to follow. Eleanor and David had found their way back to each other, their love stronger for having weathered years apart. Even William Pierce had discovered that true legacy wasn't about power or control, but about the positive change you could create in the world. As if on cue, both babies awakened, their small sounds joining the piano music and the happy chatter of people throughout the center. Eleanor Rose and David, born just days apart, would grow up knowing that family wasn't just about blood or names, but about the bonds of love and purpose that brought people together. "You know," Alex said, looking around at his gathered family, "someone once told me that the true measure of a person isn't in what they have, but in what they give. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." The piano music swelled, and more. People gathered in the community hall. Residents, students, teachers, and visitors, all part of the extended family that had grown from one simple act of kindness on a cold night. Maya adjusted Eleanor Rose in her sling, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "We all found what we were looking for, didn't we? Even if we didn't know we were looking for it." Sarah nodded, gently rocking baby David. "We found more than that. We found our true north." The sun was setting over New York, painting the sky in brilliant colors that reflected off the center's windows. In the distance, Joey's Diner was serving its usual dinner crowd, the booth where it all began probably occupied by new people with their own stories to tell. Alex looked at his family, not the one he was born into, but the one he had chosen, and who had chosen him. Maya with her brilliant mind and courageous heart, Sarah with her unwavering compassion and quiet strength, his mother and father, reunited and renewed, Gloria with her lifetime of wisdom, even his grandfather, who had learned that it's never too late to change. Together they had created something extraordinary, not just a building or a program, but a new way of seeing what was possible when people chose love over power, truth over pretense, and community over control. As the piano music faded and new sounds filled the air, children laughing, people talking, babies cooing, Alex knew that this was just the beginning. Their story would continue to grow, touching more lives, inspiring more change, building more connections. The Pierce legacy had been transformed, but more importantly, they had all been transformed by the simple truth that real power lies not in what you can take, but in what you can give. Not in the walls you build to keep others out, but in the doors you open to welcome them in. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.